Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stephanie Russell. I'm GMA's Economic Development Manager and your host for the development sessions. We'd like to welcome you out this afternoon to our latest installment of the development sessions. Just a quick housekeeping. If you would like to have any of your comments or questions posted, you can use our Q&A. And we will be monitoring that throughout the presentation, and we'll get to your questions at the very end of the presentation. At this time, I'd like to introduce our speakers today. We've got Teri Deaver and Aneesha Marwah, and they are from ArtSpace. And they're going to be giving you a great presentation on creating art spaces for artists and your arts community organizations. So Teri and Aneesha, welcome to the development sessions.
Thank you so much. And I'm Teri Deaver, and we're working in our consulting group division of ArtSpace that's based out of Minneapolis. And we'll be giving you an overview today of kind of who ArtSpace is if you're not familiar with us. And if you are, maybe you'll learn something that you didn't know, and talking a little bit about how we approach development. I have a background in the arts, just so you all know, but have been working with ArtSpace for over 20 years in a variety of different roles. Aneesha?
Hi, thank you all for having me as well. I'm also based in the Twin Cities here, and so hi from cold Minnesota this morning. And my background's in urban planning, and Teri and I actually had a chance 2 years ago to do a lot of work in Griffin, Georgia. So we'll kind of explore that case study with you guys. Have you all heard of ArtSpace? We'd love to hear just in the chat if anyone's familiar with us. We're a national nonprofit. We have about 55 buildings across the country, but please let us know. We'd love to kind of know if you kind of the frame of reference.
So we're going to pop up and go through a presentation. There'll be some video in there. And as questions come up, do, as Stephanie said, pop them into the Q&A, and we'll get to them at the end of this because we want to be able to answer all the questions that come up. But again, for those of you who aren't familiar with ArtSpace, we are a national nonprofit organization, again, based in Minnesota with a couple offices. Across in New York and in Washington, D.C. area. And our mission is to create, to foster, preserve affordable and sustainable spaces for artists and arts organizations. And we've been doing this since about 1980. And we currently have two frames in which we interact with the public and do our work. And one is through our consulting, and then one is through as a real estate developer. And a lot of people know us in that real estate development capacity. We have 54 projects nationally in 37 cities, and these are projects that could be historic renovation, reuse of a non-historic building, or new construction, or a combination of both. You can see in that bottom picture on the right is our Memphis project, which incorporates both types of development space. And we also have, the projects are often mixed use. And when we talk about mixed use, we're talking often about live-work spaces for creatives and their families that are affordable and perpetuity to them, and often have a ground floor that invites a participation from the broader community through engagement space, gallery space, space that can be used for workshops and such. That's kind of our placemaking face to the community, but also often a lot of spaces that serve the community from a non-residential standpoint for studio spaces that are rented by artists, or for gallery spaces, spaces for nonprofit organizations that could be serving the community more broadly as a social service agency. Sometimes we've had county offices of arts and culture in our buildings. We've had Zen centers and cafes and coffee shops. It's just a variety of different ways that we utilize typically the ground floor from a commercial standpoint that is serving the local community in addition to the housing above. And our projects are all public-private partnerships. So we work with local municipalities, cities, counties, states, local neighborhood associations, chambers of commerce, downtown development authorities, and arts groups, foundations across the board to make these projects happen, both on the front end when we're just kind of exploring the possibility of new space, the factors that go into making new space a success, but also from the funding standpoint. All of these are capital funding, and the sites come together through partnerships with both public entities and private entities, whether they're lenders or cities or philanthropic organizations. Next slide. And we're going to share a little video which tells about ArtSpace better than we can explain it.
Ladies and gentlemen, turn it up, go a little something like this. Now drop the beat.
ArtSpace creates affordable, sustainable spaces for artists and their families to live and work. We've collaborated hand in hand with diverse communities all around the country. And today, more than 1,700 artists and their families call an ArtSpace building home. Our affordable buildings allow artists and makers of all kinds to support themselves and deepen connections to their communities. In addition, hundreds of arts and cultural organizations find stability and operate out of our spaces, anchoring neighborhoods with cultural resources and benefiting the entire community. ArtSpace started our work 40 years ago in the Twin Cities and have since been invited to work in places all around the country. We listen to and partner with people closest to the issues to find lasting solutions for their communities. In some cases, ArtSpace has been invited to help revitalize downtowns. We've brought creative energy into abandoned spaces in rural and mountain communities. In other areas, ArtSpace is asked to preserve a place for the musicians, artists, dancers, actors, chefs, and other creatives who have contributed so much to their neighborhood and are at risk of being displaced as the neighborhood changes. Our dream is that artists and arts organizations can easily access safe, affordable space to live and work. And we have our work cut out for us. Neighborhoods with cultural resources are healthier and safer than those without. Yet many artists and arts organizations struggle to afford space in their neighborhoods. Our work is vital and needed now more than ever. More than 5,000 people are on ArtSpace waitlist for affordable space. And we receive about 150 calls every year from new communities looking to ArtSpace for help in their own town. We're dedicated to helping communities advance equitable, arts-based community development visions, fostering creative, inclusive communities coast to coast.
So I hope you enjoyed that video. It's the demonstration of that through there really gives you the sense of who we are and who we serve. And if you're ever interested in seeing more of our portfolio, you can also go to our website, which is artspace.org, and you can see the whole slew under our development. This slide popped up this map. You can see where we've consulted. We've done a lot of consulting across the nation in small towns to larger cities. And then the darker images there are where we have properties in operation. Nothing currently in Georgia, but we hope that that will change over time. Next slide. So just to recap, so there's kind of three ways we work at ArtSpace. We have our consulting team that Aneesha and I are a part of. We have our property development team, which comes in at around the time when we are looking at site acquisition, site control. They're the team that comes in, works with the community to put together all the funding, do the architectural designs, pull together the contractors, build the project, and then our asset management team comes in about a year or so before, 6 months before the project goes into operations, to work with the community around leasing and then to oversee the sustainability of those spaces in the long term, and working with our artist communities and local property managers to make sure that those projects are operating effectively. And as stated earlier, we work in invitation of communities. We never go in where we're not wanted. We want to know that there is a coalition like you all are creating in your communities that can support a project like this. So we go in with a series of goals, and I imagine that any projects that you're working on, you kind of have the same thing. So it's kind of threshold goals that you want to achieve. So one is that we want to make sure we are meeting space needs of the local community and the creative sector. Whatever that might mean. It means something different in every community, whether it's housing or studio space or maker spaces. We don't want to be duplicating efforts. We want to be complementing efforts. We're dedicated to long-term affordability. So developers will sometimes come in, make something affordable, or maybe there's placemaking activities that are temporary. And our goal is to make sure that no matter what happens in the community around, that these projects maintain their affordability for the residents and the tenants in perpetuity. We want to reflect what is unique about a community. We know that there's a lot of things that are the same in different communities, but that every community has its own particular niche, its own personality, whether it's historic buildings, whether it's the people that live there and the cultures that are living there, whether it's their brand, whatever that is, we want that to be incorporated from the initial conversations and incorporated into the design, the way that these projects function. We want BIPOC voices at the table through the process. We're very community driven, so we start having, much like you all, we start having focus groups with the local community, with leaders in the community, folks that maybe aren't always at the table, and we want them at the table to begin with, to understand what their vision is for the project, finding ways to incorporate them in the project throughout the decision-making process, through the market study work that we do, and then also certainly ensuring that they are part of a finished project, either as residents or as tenants in the community. Our projects have always been committed to sustainable and efficient design. So we want to be good to the earth. We want to use products and be located in areas that make sense for the community. And then operating the Black is one of the driving factors for us. That's why we do so much planning up front, because we want to make sure that perhaps a combination of free or low-cost land can help make these projects affordable in perpetuity, but also making sure that we're funding everything on the front end and that we're planning for the long term with regard to reserves for operating or reserves for capital improvements when you need to replace the roof 20 or 30 years down the road. We don't want to have to be going back to the community for funding for any of that at any point. So we want to make sure we're always paying our bills, keeping it affordable, and that these become assets in the community forever. Next slide. So again, we're part of the consulting team. This is this front end. Next slide. Front end work that we do, and there's a few ways that we interact with the community and that we think about development that hopefully is useful for you all as well in thinking about the work that you're doing. We always start when a community is interested in an ArtSpace type project, whether we're going to be the developer or somebody locally is going to be developing a project, no matter what size it might be, whether it's 10 units of live work housing or it's a studio only space, or it's a maker space, or it's 100 units of housing and mixed use project. We start with a preliminary feasibility, and this is our opportunity to get to understand the community, to look at 6 key criteria that we consider critical to any success of any project. So we are looking at what the market needs. We're looking at what the project vision is, the concept is for the community. We're looking at acquisition, land opportunities or building opportunities for this project. We're looking at the opportunity to fund a project on the capital side and the long-term operational sustainability of that. We're looking at other goals that we can fulfill with a project. So it's not always just about arts or about affordable housing or historic preservation. It could be about any number of objectives that a local community has. And so these are all things that we assess on the front end before we move forward as a developer or before we give any recommendations to anybody about how they might move forward on their vision for new space. We also do market studies to ensure that we are meeting a need, that we understand what people could pay for rent, we understand what kind of amenities they need, what their preferences are for location of space, all of those pieces that ensure that we're building what the community needs and that we can demonstrate to funders and others that there's a need for this space and a reason for them to get involved in the project. We also work with individual arts organizations, with cultural districts, with downtown development authorities, others that are trying to advance spaces, whether it's a first lease for a nonprofit organization, or it's a group that wants to expand their building or buy their first building or anchor an arts district, create economic development opportunities through placemaking opportunities. These are customized technical consulting that we do to meet people and groups where they are at. So for instance, we have done creative space action plans in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which Aneesha I think might talk about a little bit, but thinking about space for placemaking. We're working in Napa right now, helping a city understand the infrastructure and ecosystem needs to support individual creatives and artists and manufacturers and other creative businesses that are producing things, whether it's making sure that they've got a place to do it, they've got the funding to capitalize their businesses, a whole slew of different ecosystems. So we want to put forth an action plan that can help them to obtain those goals. sustainable facilities analysis. We work with groups that have a plan in place, but they want to make sure that they are capitalizing it, that they know how much it's going to cost to build it, how much it's going to, where the funding might come from, and that they're planning for the next 20 or 30 years in terms of their operating budgets and thinking about it from a real estate perspective, thinking about it in terms of paying utilities and paying taxes and keeping the roof in good repair, and that they're making smart decisions along the way. We also have an ArtSpace immersion program across the country that is funded by private foundations and in some cases with city partners that can help cohorts of organizations within those communities, 10 to 12, that come together over a 12-month period to learn about all of the aspects that they need to build the capacity to achieve their goals and objectives around space. Again, whether it's a nonprofit renting their first space or building their first project that they want to see realized. Next slide.
Yeah, so as Teri mentioned, a lot of our first work that we do in a new community is called a preliminary feasibility study. What that entails is it's usually two of us kind of coming to a community pre-COVID. During COVID, we were doing them all virtually. But meeting with a local core group who's kind of that cross-sector leadership committee of artists, city people, maybe the development community that wants to talk about how we can make a project for artists in the community. So it's a lot of that listening to artists, touring potential sites and art assets, kind of understanding what's that unique aspect in your town. And then it's delivering a really thorough report around, what are the financing capabilities, what buildings would be best suited for what type of arts, maybe a little matchmaking while we're there too, if there's a group who really needs space and they never thought about this building, or likewise, we kind of go through all those different, what is the potential project concept? So is it an ArtSpace building, or is it maybe something that can be done locally if the building's, on the smaller side, or maybe it's around, there needs to be a more thorough arts council and we can help with laying out the steps of what does that mean when we come out to see the feasibility. And so when we're there, we start all projects with what are the broader community goals. So we know that arts and creative aspects are definitely one of them, but aligning a project like this with many other goals makes it much more successful. So understanding what else is needed in the community. So we've heard a lot in residential density, preserving affordability, historic preservation, urban infill, downtown revitalization, preserving a cultural community, supporting rural artists, transit-oriented, supporting creative businesses and nonprofits, addressing racial and economic disparity, anchoring an arts district, enhancing healthy lifestyles, and promoting tourism. So we usually have a community, either through a poll or an in-person vote, choose what is the top 3, knowing that all of these would be great to be addressed, but that's, focusing on about top 3 priorities that could also be helpful with a project such as an ArtSpace building. So here's a quick case study of our work in Georgia. This was Griffin, Georgia, it's just south of Atlanta, that Teri and I were there 2 years ago. And their interest from that broader community goals was a lot around historic preservation. They have a great kind of downtown building stock, addressing racial and economic disparity, kind of a traditionally segregated community along the train tracks. So thinking about maybe where a project could be that could kind of bridge the community divide that's there, and in a place that can really support creative businesses and nonprofits in their community. So we suggested several different project concepts based on the sites that we visited and feedback from the arts community. And then we moved on to our second type of study, which is the arts market study, which is that assessment of need. It's a 6-week-long survey that's administered online, and we gathered quantitative information around what type of project would make the most sense in Griffin. And the focus was around the Heritage Park / Rosemont School in the Fairmont neighborhood, which aligned with a lot of their overlapping goals. So that's a tradition, that was a historically and still is an African-American neighborhood. And they want to see a space come together with a mix of affordable housing, community space, artist studios. It'll be likely developed locally by the Griffin Housing Authority, with us helping them as a consultant to get that creative space piece together. It's interesting, when they first called us to do the study, we were called by the Land Bank, was the group that wanted to interact with us around a old funeral home in a totally different part of town. You know, it ended up being way too small for any type of ArtSpace project, but just how the arc really changed from that first phone call and what our visit was intended to be to how we've kind of come out to what this project concept is looking like. And here's a short video in their words that they had made during the market study.
The renovation of the Rosen Wall would definitely captivate the artistic talent, the culture of the community.
It was really important to me and to my husband that we raised our son in a community that embraced diversity, that embraced different thoughts.
We have lots of creative projects going on here in Griffin and Spalding County, and ArtSpace is a welcome addition to this.
The people in this community are extremely creative.
Photographers, artists, musicians, other dancers. I think having a cultural center, it would be unifying for the entire community.
So they're going to be constructing an 85-unit complex adjacent to this property on the football field just to the west of this building.
It is historically significant because it represents the cooperation and collaboration of two men from different races, different ethnicities, different social status, and different religions.
With cultural, educational activities being planned in this neighborhood, we should see a fantastic change.
The redevelopment of this area would support and encourage people to be involved in the arts in this community.
I think that that's the cool thing about Griffin, and especially this project, is that we have the opportunity to share different stories and perspectives through art, and that's just a more enriching community for us to all live
in. Yeah. And so that's a quick recap of what we were doing in Griffin. And then and just to quickly wrap up some of the other work that we do on our consulting team is we do a lot of technical assistance, so kind of smaller scopes of work with nonprofit groups. We help them figure out, you know, what spaces do they maybe want in a building? How much would all that cost? What's a governance structure that makes sense? What are the artists' needs and what type of spaces would they want? And we help them prioritize and do a couple different kind of consulting workshops and exercises around that. Site selection, is renting or owning more appropriate for that group? So this is kind of our technical assistance that's unrelated to our ArtSpace development pipeline. So we say there's 6 elements of space planning. There's the leadership, kind of who's your team, project concept, what is it that you're actually trying to build, cost analysis, how much would the operating and capital cost, and location, where should it be, what would the site be, funding and communications, and a lot of our technical scopes focus on those top 4 elements. And we like to also say that real estate is plus nonprofits, it's not programming. So making sure that your roof does not care about your mission at the end of the day. So managing real estate is a totally different skill than running an organization or running a nonprofit. Every scenario is very complex. So think big picture, but we kind of help bridge that divide between figuring out some of those real estate components. And I'll open up to Q&A.
And I know that there's a Q&A. If people have questions, you can drop it into there, or if you have dropped it into chat, I'm sure that's being monitored as well. Would love to answer any questions that you do have.
I see a comment about Buffalo, New York. Yes, we have a project there. So very cool.
And if there's anyone, if you do want to ask it live, we can unmute you for a little bit. Just give us a heads up in the chat or raise your hand, and we can unmute you.
There is one hand raised.
Okay. All right, Vivian.
Looks like it's still on mute.
Oh. There we go. Go ahead, Vivian.
Again, I'm Vivian. I am the marketing operations specialist with the City of Union City. I just want to thank you all for sharing this information with everyone. I know with those who are participating with the call are also, just thinking about ways to add, that creative element in their communities. When it comes down to, identifying, possible spaces or identifying, not only the space to hold, for artists and creatives to do their work, but also in housing. Is one of the criteria like those properties or buildings, do they have to be city owned? Like, are those the only ones that are eligible, or how would one go about, identifying something when working with the city?
Sure. We have we have a series of criteria that we use in assessing sites. I would say that in general, city-owned or publicly owned sites that are being held for public benefit use and for housing and others are always the top of the list, because it's really hard to take property that's super expensive and turn around and make it affordable in the long term. It just takes a lot of additional public and private subsidy to make that work. So that's always a first choice. And also in our experience in the way that we approach projects, we are often in site control for a year or longer, depending on the type of project we're doing. So if we're doing housing and we're using a low-income housing tax credit, you might only be able to apply for that on an annual basis. And if you don't get it the first year, you go back the next year. Not too many private owners are willing to sit on property until we can put together the whole funding package. And we're not in a position to take on the risk of just purchasing land in the hopes that we can make it happen. We try to be really thorough in our decision making on the front end so that we don't run into that situation even in a public land scenario, but it does work best. But we've worked with private property owners, developers who maybe have some land adjacent to the property that they're already developing, and it makes sense for the community to have that as an artist project, or maybe they want to make a donation or a partial donation on that land because they have they want to serve the community with the assets that they have. So there's different ways of approaching it, but affordability is the key piece.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I'm curious too if anybody's working on projects of any scale, whether it's, just a small 500 square foot space for exhibits or classes, or if it's a housing that you have questions about too, specific questions, not just theoretical questions. And I should mention too, because sometimes I know when you're on these, you don't think about those questions until later. We, during the pandemic, we have offered pro bono services through ArtSpace that we are continuing to do. So if there is something that you are working on or want to explore, just want to talk more with somebody from our team about your ideas and how to take next steps in that, you can go to our website at artspace.org and go to our consulting page on there. And one of the blocks that you'll find, it might be the first block, there's a pro bono section. You can click on that and then sign up, and somebody will get back to you to spend a little time with you answering questions and or exploring options that you might be trying to make a decision about.
Well, I think the work that you're doing is amazing. Living in Metro Atlanta for most of my life, especially recently, I've seen more local spaces of this sort go away, and it's usually either the for-profit or nonprofit owner has lost their lease because the area has become higher rent, or that maybe they do own the building, but the offers just got too good to turn down. And your organization's doing some great things to create these spaces that'll last.
I appreciate that. We've, as described, and we've worked in Griffin, but we've fielded a lot of calls from the Atlanta metro area in particular, but I think throughout the state. But that with that challenge that artists and nonprofits and others are really facing as your cities change, and kind of hoping that we can help out in some way. Always, there's just a lot of calls. So we're just definitely getting the sense that it's that preservation of space is really critical to maintaining your communities.
Teri or Aneesha, just a quick question for you. On some of your spaces, have they been able to facilitate incubation for, I think, Aneesha, you mentioned a little bit about how they're used for producing products, but do you see some potential for doing arts incubators and having them kind of be a stepping stone? Have you had experience with that, or is that something that you would consider looking at when developing out a space?
As ArtSpace, as us developing the space or consulting, it's really on that real estate piece. So kind of helping someone. So we have a building here that has a fire arts center in it. So they're their own arts organization who run this amazing all types of fire arts, blacksmithing, neon sign making, everything under the sun between. And they actually just added like a giant foundry casting program too. So they're doing a lot of the public art in Minnesota now. They're getting all those commissions are coming through because they have all these capabilities now. But what we really help them with is secure that affordable space and make sure that they understand sustainably how can the real estate piece be running and keep up with that, and how do you build out your next phase of that real estate program, well, so that they could kind of flourish as the nonprofit programmer is the art center themselves.
Excellent.
Kind of if you think about like kind of the vanilla shell almost, and then having those kind of local groups are the ones that are programming it and incubating it and doing all the kind of activation of it.
Yeah, I think it's really important what you guys are doing, because in order for the arts to have an economic impact, sometimes they do, and it's like any other business, particularly in our downtowns when we're doing downtown development. You want to be able to have that organization run as a business, so that they do have an economic impact in the community. But at the same time, we all know that these types of businesses are not always they're not always completely sustainable. They're not your typical types of businesses. So they can have an economic impact in several different ways, through tourism, through productivity, through incubation, education. There's a lot of ways that you can see a financial impact. So I think the work that you guys are doing to help the organization maintain a workable space that they can do their programming in is really beneficial. And it's like Chris mentioned, we see too often in our development neighborhoods and our city centers, where the focus is just put on, what's that actual dollar that's coming out of there. Well, there's quantitative dollars and there's qualitative dollars. And with our arts programming and our arts organizations, we tend to see that measured a little more in that qualitative component. And that really is very key to place-based economic development. You may not see that investment directly up front in the first year, but you're going to see it throughout the years as that organization and that business, quote unquote, develops in your community, because it becomes an asset to the community.
Teri and I have done so many focus groups and asked people like, what do you want to see in that like community space? People, place where I feel welcome, place where we can be ourselves and be at, and like that space, you can't put a dollar on that type of space. That community feel where you feel connected to your community it's not that itself is not a viable business model. So trying to figure out what overlapping goals could we, if this was, say there's youth programming in here, say there's this, what other kind of grant opportunities does that bring in? What other types of ways? Because that is so important. I mean, a space in Griffin that, felt that bridged a racial divide that's so historic that artists can both be working in is such a big step just in that direction. Thinking about a project concept in that way. I'm working with a Latino arts group in San Antonio who's been, you know, for not too much money, was gifted this old garage building. And they're like, well, how do we ever even program this? Like, what do we do with it? How do we make it feel like it's for the community? What will it even cost to get it up and running to have this vision? So they know that they want this space and they know that they have a lot of users for it, but how do we get from that to that idea? And that's what we're helping with them with.
Well, we really
Can you
appreciate.
speak a bit more on the food incubation?
What was that, Chris?
Because it sounds. Can you speak a little more about the food? When there mention in the video about food?
A culinary kitchen kind of
kitchen, yeah.
incubation. We haven't done, I don't think we've done one ourselves, but going back to being able to work with a programmer that wants to deliver that opportunity, we can identify the need for it in the community, provide the space for them to run that, look at, and give them the tools that they need and give them the long-term affordable space to make it maybe pencil out better for them, because those are to say, and thinking incubation piece of it too is just public agencies and private stakeholders can put in place to ensure that these, whether they're individual artists kind of starting off with their families, or they are small creative businesses, or they are manufacturing products, there's this continuum that we're looking at in Napa, working with an organization, if you all aren't familiar with, called Placemaking out of San Francisco. And they work with small scale manufacturers, many of who are creative businesses, whether it's breweries and or artisanal products, whatever that might be. And so there's this really great meshing between what we do and what they do. So the city of Napa brought us in, and because they said, we want to grow this, we see this as a deficit in our community. We want to have the opportunity to be to people making things and people to know that things are being made here. And so we are looking at the infrastructure and ecosystems they need to grow businesses, to help artists connect with funding tools that are maybe typically for a non-creative business, and what is missing in the community from a workforce standpoint, from an affordable housing standpoint for the people that need to work in these spaces, or how do they get the supplies that they need, and is that in the community now? And if it's not, what partnerships can be made, what new programs can be developed, how can funding be allocated to ensure that all of these ecosystems have the foundation necessary for individual creatives right up through larger scale manufacturers to work seamlessly in a community.
I came across Placemate a couple years ago at a conference and met the creator, and I was blown away by what they were doing out there. And thank you, Aneesha, for posting that link. Please check out that link to Placemate. You know, the fact that you guys are doing something similar is really, really interesting, and it speaks to the economics of this creation and this creativity, and you know, getting back to that cottage industry and that creative cottage industry. I think COVID has provided some really unique opportunities. Not that they haven't always been there, but we've started to shine that white hot spotlight on our local businesses. Georgia has a Georgia Made, Georgia Grown program, which is very, very successful. And it's very similar to the idea of what Placemaking is doing, is providing resources and advertising and marketing for locally based, locally sourced products. You know, as communities, if we can get in there and provide spaces and provide support to our local artisans and our local manufacturers, that just strengthens our community as a whole, economically, socially, and really creates some opportunity to do some unique workforce development to combat some of our issues that are caused by gentrification and aging out in our communities. So this is a really what seems like a simplistic topic, it's not. It's very detailed and it's very nuanced. And we're so grateful to have Teri and Aneesha be able to come today and to speak on this. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to email me and I'll pass those on to Teri and Aneesha. But I just want to thank you guys so much for what you're doing and for providing us the opportunity to learn more about what you're doing, and to, you know, possibly get you guys to start working on some projects here in Georgia would be great. So thank you so much for your time. We appreciate everyone that participated today. And once again, our development sessions is advertised and recorded. So you can have access to that on the georgiacitiesfoundation.org website. And we'll get the presentation slides for you guys as well. So once again, thank you for joining us for this session of the development sessions, and we will see you next month.